Hey everyone, I'm Aditya Bansal, a founding engineer at Cortex, where I currently work as a full stack engineer, building new products, guiding other engineers on the team, and investing in our technical infrastructure. Today I'm going to speak about automated testing, the why behind it, what it actually entails, and most importantly, how to achieve it in your engineering organizations without making your head hurt. First off, why do we want automated testing? What is the problem that we're trying to solve for? The data suggests that bugs or software defects that are caught in the maintenance phase are 100x more expensive than catching them earlier in the life cycle. There is literally a massive financial loss to companies for not investing in this kind of automation. Moreover, many a times lack of testing can lead to a very problematic customer experience, which eventually leads to them churning. Not just that, from an engineering culture perspective, production bugs lead to frustration because engineers don't want to spend time worrying what would happen if they release new code. They want to focus on releasing it. Burnout as well, because more bugs means more firefighting, means longer hours, which eventually leads to a frustrating experience for the engineers. This is more common in the industry than I originally thought it would be, and it pains me to see so many engineers go through this. And finally, attrition. If engineers work in an environment where they feel frustrated for too long, they just end up leaving because there are better opportunities elsewhere. And on the flip side, the biggest benefit of having these checks and balances include a higher quality product, the biggest one. This cannot be emphasized enough. As more and more software is being written, users are critical of where they spend their time and, more importantly, their money. Speaking from personal experience, I've literally been yelled at by customers because of the bugs that I committed cost them money. Secondly, it leads to engineering happiness because they are no longer stressed out about being paged in the middle of the night. And finally, another severely underrated benefit of testing is it serves as engineering documentation. Your tests will usually include the product use cases, and it helps newer engineers understand the flow of your software by reading through these tests. So what exactly is automated testing? In my mind, it's a set of checks that are run on every commit to your main branch. These checks do three things. Number one, they validate that the existing functionality works as expected. Number two, they validate that the new code works as expected. And most importantly, number three, they tell you what is not working. And in an ideal world, they block you from pushing this code to production. Now that we've spoken about why this is important and what it actually entails, let's talk about the technical parts. Automated testing is honestly an umbrella term that needs to be broken down into smaller, more achievable chunks. The most common form of this is breaking it into a pyramid of tests. For the sake of simplicity, let's talk about the three biggest pieces under this category. The first one, unit tests, is usually the first line of defense, the simplest ones, and in my mind, your most powerful tool. They usually test the smallest unit in your codebase in the form of simple inputs and outputs, and are the least likely to have any false negatives. The definition of what a unit is very debatable in the industry, but in most cases, it'll be your classes in the object-oriented programming world, or your functions if you prefer functional programming. Then come the integration tests. When you're confident that each individual unit works as expected, you can move on to the next step, which is testing logical groupings of units together and testing them as a black box. For example, if you're building a web server, this can be a controller test that don't care about what services are being used or what the underlying implementation is. Then comes the final piece, the end-to-end or your UI test. This is where you would test the app as if the customer would use it. Let's say you're building an e-commerce website. A simple end-to-end test case will include the user signing up, adding a product to the cart, and checking out successfully. Keep in mind, these are the tests that are most likely to break as your product changes, so use them wisely and only in places where you absolutely need them. One note on the testing pyramid, the different levels serve different purposes. The pyramid by itself implies that you should have a much bigger unit test suite than an integration test suite, and a much bigger integration test suite than an end-to-end test suite, and I believe that has worked well for me, but your mileage may vary. All of these combined can make for a very strong test suite that should save your engineering team hours and hours of dealing with production outages. One final piece I wanted to touch upon that I think is usually not spoken about as much as I think it ought to be is culture. From what I've observed, unless the higher-ups, your managers, your VPs, your exec team, understand the value out of this automation, nothing is going to get done in this domain. Many a times this becomes an influencing problem for engineers more than an engineering problem. How do I convince my higher-ups that it'll save the company a lot of money by investing in this, rather than the N+1 feature? How do I convince my engineers that no, their code is not perfect and it will break at some point? The thing that worked the best for me was to start by getting buy-in from each of them, and I had different strategies for both of these groups. For the key decision makers, this can include showing them the data. Show them the percentage of time engineers spend on Jira issues with labels bugs, or the number of customers that have churned because of the regressions. And for the engineering team, I'd say start small. Build a proof of concept of a simple class being broken down into multiple tests. Show them how easy it can be to go from testing everything manually to just waiting for your CI provider to report the results. Tell them about the possibility of less firefighting and the better work-life balance this will eventually lead to. With all of this, I believe teams can move beyond the painful cycle of finding and fixing and finding bugs and focus on what matters the most, which is building amazing products. Thank you.